if you take accountability for yourself and every person out there starts changing, even if it's a change by 25%, it's still 25% better than it was before. The accepting mediocrity is going to be the demise of everything, everyone, every organization, every country, every continent. And one of my core values, and that's something I will never compromise on, is integrity. Integrity is pivotal to move forward in life. Always acknowledge that you might not necessarily always be right, and there's never a right or wrong anyway. It's about a position on either side of a spectrum, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Hello everyone, welcome to Stories and Journeys, where we explore the transformative power of learning, growth, and resilience. Join us as we uncover untold narratives and ignite curiosity. My name is Oluwatimilei Oyedeji, and joining us here today is an amazing person, someone with over 2 decades of experience within the media space here on the continent of Africa, driving so much value and impact for people, for brands, for products, and ensuring that we're able to move the frontier forward on the continent is no other person than the current regional director for Africa at Eskimi, Cornelis Ouwehand. Hi, Cornelis.
Hello, Timmy. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thank you so much for coming.
No, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Accepting our invitation. It's really an honor to have you here. I think it's been a very long time since we met a couple of years ago, and the journey for us started, especially when it comes to impacts you're driving and creating, on the continent. I'll just get straight to it and just ask you, for over 2 decades now, you've been trying to ensure that, from ensuring that processes are put in place, operations are set properly, ensuring that business is able to make profit, also ensuring that brands also get as much value when it comes to media. How's the journey been like for you as a person?
So, yes, I guess by now 2 decades in the industry, it's been a very interesting journey. Lots of learnings, lots of falling, and then having to pick oneself up. But I think it's at the core of it all. It speaks to what you were saying earlier around values, integrity, always looking to challenge the status quo and raising the standards, and not settling for this is okay. Could it be slightly better? It's always having that curiosity around trying to improve not only what's around you, but the self as well. I think it's pivotal. My journey has been an interesting one, and if we go back a few years, I was actually born down the road in Côte d'Ivoire. My mom is French, my dad is Dutch. I grew up in Côte d'Ivoire until the age of 14, so I grew up in French. And there's a reason I say this, because I guess it shaped me in a certain way. At the age of 14, we moved to Holland, and I knew 2 words, yes and no, in Dutch.
Yeah.
Something my father failed to realize that might happen one day, but and that was a massive shift in terms of a person. Not an easy age at 14 years old to completely uproot from everything I knew to everything I didn't know. But in that is I guess the core of the message, which I think I'll speak to adaptability today. It's very important to be able to adapt to circumstances. So being 14, moving into a new environment, failing at school because I didn't know the language. So I spent a few years doing, I'm going to call it grade 6, and I don't know what the equivalent is here in Nigeria. But eventually I finished school in the Netherlands. I got my school matriculation. And then I decided to go study, and I didn't want to study in Holland. I guess being born in Côte d'Ivoire, being used to warm weather. The Netherlands was not exactly that. You're lucky if it's above 20 degrees 20 days a year. So I decided to go study in South Africa.
Okay.
And I guess I do come from a place of privilege and I say privilege because my parents were willing and had the means to entertain my journey. And I also appreciate that it's not the same for everyone. So I'm very cognizant of, I guess, how lucky I was. I arrived in South Africa I was actually quite naive at the time. I was actually almost clueless about South Africa, its past, the previous regime, which was bad on all fronts. And I quickly, again, had to adapt. I had to adapt to a new culture, in this case, a new language. English was my third language. I knew a bit more than 2 words this time. I did pay a little bit of attention at school, but rolled into the university system. I quickly learned a lot about human dynamics. I think, and this is the beauty of having the exposure. It forces you as a human to adapt based on the circumstances that you're dealing with, based on the humans that you're dealing with, based on the genders that you're dealing with, based on the cultures. So a lot of variables coming at you all the time, inevitable mistakes made on the personal front, and then you learn to rectify. And again, you take that into your stride, and you're constantly adapting to your environment. And quite an interesting anecdote for me as a person, and I've realized that in later years, is that, for example, my friends from Holland found it quite interesting to be around me when I was in France or in South Africa, because over time I had learned to adapt so well that my core values never changed, but I could be seen as a different person because I adapted to the environment. I adapted to the local culture, maybe the local music, the local sporting events. If you ask me, am I a soccer fan? I'm going to say yes. I support Arsenal, probably because 20 years ago the team was French. I mean, I'm just saying that out there. But I've always kind of tried to integrate. I've never taken that for granted. Some of the lessons is sometimes, and again, it doesn't come for free. So sometimes you have to put yourself out there. You have to say to yourself, oh, if I want to become friends with Timmy, what do I need to do? Now, it might sound very calculated to start, but as long as it comes from a genuine place, it's okay. Because it's not like I'm trying to get something out of you. I'm trying to create a relationship and a friendship, and that for me is what human nature tends to be. But when you arrive in a very strange environment, very different, you can't expect others to shift for you. You need to adapt to the area you find yourself in. And I've kept that going through my entire life. And if you look at my working career, I started in logistics. Taking a step back, I studied zoology and oceanography. For those that don't know this, it's the study of all animals, all animal forms, from insects to mammals to etc. And oceanography, very much around climate change. I think there's a bit of talk about that, pollution, etc. So what can be done to prevent that? Quickly realized after 3 years and getting my degree that what were the career opportunities within the field, very much science. I would become a lecturer one day. And I decided, okay, there's more to this. And I went into a little bit of a business foundation. We're doing what we used to call a postgrad in organization and management. Very interesting course. For a year, you learn every aspect of the business, from accounting to finance to HR to project management, you name it. Reading legal documents. So a very broad base. I would almost call it a jack of all trades and a master of none, because it wasn't a specialty. But that being said, it kind of opened my eyes to the business world. It opened my eyes to human dynamics. We were running a project within a group of 7 of us. And I mean, that, your whole dynamic changes from only being accountable to yourself to now being accountable for a group. And it can be quite hard when you're trying to get the group to move in one direction. By default, some people take a leadership direction. I always tended to find myself in that situation. But not everybody agrees. People will challenge you, say, who made you the leader? So taking on leadership is not a given. I think it needs to be earned in a word. So post-studies, I went into logistics. I did 6 years of import and exports. I think
Right at the time?
Expeditors, yes. International company. They were very... I'm still super grateful to them. I did a management traineeship in London. I went through every department. Again, jack of all trades, master of none. I did customs declaration, import tariffs. I had piles of files about this high from the floor, and you had to get through it by Monday. Ironically, because of the science degree and this, I think my attention to detail rose quite high. There was significant repercussions if you use the wrong currency to import goods into a country. And then I drove forklifts to the great dismay of the branch manager, who found out that the warehouse team let me drive forklifts without a license. It was great fun. I spent a year in Birmingham, after London. Then I did a trip around the world. Again, privileged to have saved some money and decide, okay, we're going to explore the world a little bit. And especially grateful because they gave me an opportunity to come back into South Africa. Not from South Africa originally. I had a study permit for 4 years, but a work permit was a whole different story. So what skill could I bring to the table that would allow me into the country? So a very long visa application. Anyway, I spent 4 or 5 years with them. Again, in the detail, import, exports, learning human dynamics, learning how to, pacify people when they were very upset that their containers of goods were late by 3 weeks. Now, generally speaking, never really are because of us. The production was probably late, container got loaded late, and then it just snowballs. My best was what I deemed a very, very well-educated man in his 40s, and keeping in mind I was late 20s, asking me, can you phone the ship's captain to ask him to come in sooner because I need my container? That was an interesting kind of realization in my life. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. What can I do here? But again, I think the learning there was, okay, how do I pacify this human who is in a serious position of stress? And that we kind of found a common way to move forward. And then from logistics, I moved into marketing. A good friend of mine was running his own little. We were 40 men strong at the time, a company called Abari Media, which might resonate in certain areas of Nigeria and Africa. I guess they were the first big reseller in Africa. They were reselling BBC, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. All the big properties. MSN, for those that remember what MSN is. We also had a sister company within that doing below-the-line promotions. I spent 7 years there. I did everything from operations director to interim financial director. Didn't have an accounting degree, but I had to learn, and I learned quite quickly to read balance sheets, income statements, manage P&Ls, because I was close to the CEO at the time. And it was an amazing opportunity to learn on the go, apply all this energy I had into something new. Ultimately, CEOs and founders are the ultimate decision makers. And you also learn that with time. Your opinion, you can express your opinions, but there comes a moment where you need to realize that ultimately that person needs to pay the salaries at the end of the month. And as valuable as your opinion might seem to yourself, if that person doesn't necessarily hear it, it's okay, we move on. They have the ultimate decision. So you also need to make peace with that, because it can lead to a lot of frustration when you're trying to be heard. You don't feel heard. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. It's not at all. It's just somebody that is, I guess, higher up the food chain makes that decision and ultimately rolls the dice. And because you can get very, very frustrated if you end up in that situation of like, oh, nobody's hearing me. There needs to be a moment of realization. You say, okay, the person has made a call. I'm going to go with it and I'm going to support it. Because otherwise, you might as well leave. That's my opinion. Again, everything I say are personal opinions. Spent 7 years with a Bari, and then we sold to a big group, Publicis actually, of Publicis Group. And we became Publicis South Africa. We had 5 businesses. We were managing P&Ls across. We were managing budgets across the board. Lots of change within that framework. And then I guess an important realization came for me is that as a human, I felt that I operated better within potentially a smaller framework, and back to what I said earlier, adaptability, jack of all trades, master of none. Because I guess as businesses grow bigger, you tend to need very astute specialists in specific fields. Like me being an interim financial director was doable at the time. You couldn't conceive it if it's a business of 100 or more people. Why? Because there's just too many regulations. I just didn't have the qualifications. Okay. But the learning was always there, and I guess I could have, if I wanted to, gone into that direction. But also some learnings there around, this was not for me, this specific direction. Ironically, I find myself today in a sales director's position. I never liked sales. I think you and I have spoken about this before. My first job in South Africa was as a sales executive, driving around industrial estates, trying to find clients that would entrust their product into our services. Now, not sure you're familiar with South Africa, but pretty much similar to here. 35 to 40 degrees in the sun. We had to wear a suit and tie all day, every day. Climb into a car when it's 50 degrees in the car, and the novelty wears off quite quickly. And that's why I shifted quite quickly in my career into operational management. Hence, started in sales for a year, then went into operations. I joined a Bari and it was very much operation, finance, budgeting, pretty much the entire spectrum. So the learning at a Bari was amazing. We grew from 30 people in the company to 150 people. We were acquired. And then that personal realization came as okay, I don't operate as well in a big environment. So I called it. And then coming back to that notion of the self-realization. It's okay not to like a specific job. Don't blame the world for it. Take accountability. No need to blame yourself for it either. These things happen. And shift. Find an opportunity elsewhere. Shift your perception. Look at what else is within that framework that would create opportunities. For example, shifting into marketing, shifting into creative, something that happened to you a little bit. And And that was great. I loved being in operations. I would even do building renovations, hiring internet contractors, negotiating all that stuff, reading all the contracts, all the details. So again, no legal background whatsoever, but after a year of reading a few contracts, now my biggest challenges were what is not in there. Okay, so that's why I trusted a lawyer. Say, find what's not in there. And these are the 2 or 3 things that could expose us as an entity. So that was my job. I didn't have signing rights. In the end I did, but that's a different story. So then I shifted into Dynamo. I think a name that still probably resonates quite well in Nigeria and other African territories. Biggest reseller in Africa, but on the back of winning the Twitter contract, Facebook and Meta doing their own thing, Google doing their own thing. And I was there for 7 years. I initially started with Twitter South Africa, looking after the team there as a sales director. Ironically, did that involve selling? Not really. Again, my job was not to sell. My job was to guide and lead others. And there's a massive difference between somebody who is extremely good at sales and somebody that can lead and manage others. These are 2 very different characteristics. And I think many businesses make the mistake of appointing their best potential sales or whatever field you're in as a leader or as a manager. Having EQ and human skills is very different than being able to sell ice creams to polar bears. So I spent 7 years in a Dynamo, went from Twitter South Africa alone to then take on Twitter Africa. That was an interesting journey. My first exposure with Nigeria came about around that time. We had a team here. We had some very interesting findings of realizing that our team was not only working for us, but they were running double jobs. And I'll touch on that just now again. And it was quite hard. I mean, Nigeria is what I would call incredibly dynamic market. A lot of energy. I love the people. Very charismatic. But from a business point of view, it's in some cases hard. It's hard. The currency fluctuation, the inability to move funds out of the country. Now imagine if you take Twitter as an example, for every 100,000 naira that was invested by a local client, probably 80,000 of that 100,000 was in dollars and it had to be taken out of the country. Now, there are massive debates around that, and there's a right and wrong, and not here to debate that, but it brought some pretty significant complexities to running a business here. So much so that we got to a point where when the Naira crashed, and I think it was in 2017, there was a big devaluation. As a business, we lost a lot of money. Why? Because, and understandably so, clients had committed 1 million naira, but all of a sudden 1 million naira was effectively 500,000 naira.
Correct.
They could still only pay 1 million. They would have had to pay 2 million to make up the dollar difference. So as a business, we made a decision to only accept USD. And it took me the better part of 4 years to convince Twitter, the publisher in this case, that they need to take on that risk. And it was just part and parcel of working with a territory or a country like Nigeria, a lot of risk, a lot of exposure. And I guess at the end of it, ultimately, they've got control of the monetary aspect. So we found a couple of wins. So I managed to actually open up Twitter to trade in Naira and allowed our client to see the dashboards in Naira, which I hope made a difference.
I think it did. Still,
Because again, I was always amazed. We would walk into meetings, and even my teams, who were Nigerians working here, would talk in dollars. And I could see the clients like always kind of knew what the dollars stood for, but always struggled to convert that to naira. So I said, okay, we're shifting it. And again, shifting, adapting, finding ways to improve the ultimate result, and I guess improve everybody's lives. So for me, a dynamo was, again, about managing or leading people. And we ask about contribution. For many years, I was wondering, the day-to-day of a job is the day-to-day. It's very often a routine, and some aspects are not as exciting as others. And there's two big things here. The first thing is who you work with. And I've always found that quite important. I've realized after my first 7 years in marketing with Abari that the people I worked for were actually probably the most important aspect for me. The work was the work. Marketing was a lot more fun than logistics. I can guarantee you that. Anybody out there, just know. But it's still about the people. It's about the human relations. And for me, that was quite pivotal. And Dynamo was exactly the same. I went back to a smallish environment, very agile team. We made decisions quickly. We were not scared. Did some crazy stuff, some fun stuff. And ultimately, it was fun to work there. And I think that's a big realization, especially for young and upcoming, not employees, but young and upcoming professionals, to one, realize that a job is a job. If you don't like it, just shift. Very important. Two, there's always going to be an element of routine, and it's boring, and do I really have to do this? But I think it's also realizing the environment you work in contributes to your own well-being. That being said, persistence and continuance and loyalty are qualities that are pivotal. I think for everybody to be able to showcase their own capabilities and worth to somebody else. Because keep in mind, it remains a transaction. It remains, I'm giving you my time. And what do you give me in return? Well, in general, it's money. But maybe a free lunch twice a week. These are all perks. Funny enough, talk about perks. I've always seen business travel as a perk. Business travel has allowed me to go to places in the world that I would have never had an opportunity to visit out of my own accord. Not only from a financial point of view, because it's expensive, and two, I might never have considered going to San Francisco, but Twitter took me there. I might have never considered going to London. Spotify took me there, within the business construct. So very privileged again, and appreciated those, what I deem now perks of the business. Yes, you have to leave your family behind, and you have to leave your comfort of home. You have to travel. Trust me, Lagos Airport is entertaining on the best of days. But it's the same everywhere in the world. So I think the people you work with, the job you do, are all elements that you need to take into consideration as a young professional, that you might think, this is so hard. Well, life is not easy. Nobody's going to give you anything. You can, but a transactional aspect, if you do a good job, you will probably be appreciated. Yes, there are average cases sometimes where the leader is actually an average leader and does not recognize. But it's about that first element is you control your own realm here. Blaming others is I think, potentially a waste of energy. And if the circumstances don't allow you to grow, again, you could blame others, but it's on you to shift your perspective, maybe shift position. In some cases, easier said than done. I'm also very cognizant of how hard it can be to find a suitable position. But the truth is, over my 20 years, and I call them kids. I might have called you a kid at some point in my career, but from all my kids, the ones that worked hard, the ones that were loyal, the ones that spent the time and did the graft would eventually be uplifted. It's a natural progression. And I think going back to a crazy time 5 years ago, actually post-COVID, where we found ourselves very much in a work from home, very flexi times. Now, I was maybe old school, so I would still believe in coming to the office every day, be there at 8, 8:30, leave at 5, 5:30. Yes, work-life balance, absolutely. I'm the first one to advocate it. Family, very important. You and I have had this conversation. But within the workspace, I quickly saw that some individuals were not going to be seen. It didn't mean they didn't work hard. They were just never there. Now, who is going to advance in a corporate environment if, say, I'm the boss, for lack of better terms, it's 5:15 on a Thursday afternoon, and I need some help with something. And I put my head up around the office, and there's one little guy sitting there. And I know that little guy comes in at 7 and leaves at 6 every day. In my eyes, he's present in my very small construct there and then. But a guy that went to gym at 3 should be back online at 4, which is perfectly fine, but not in the office. And he might work till 7. I take nothing away from the fact that that person is working, but he's not present. And I think for my advice to young professionals, be present, be seen. And it's not about trying too hard either. It's just do your job, do it well, be consistent, the recognition will come and the growth will come. Because even if you're not successful within a particular job description, I think it's probably a more accurate term, if the business can see that you bring value, and value is energy, value is engaging with others, value is joining the company drinks on a Friday, that is also value. And yes, we have our own lives, and again, we want to do our own things, but it's important to bring that to the table, because that leads to being seen. And from there, even if you're not performing at your job, the business will try to make a plan for you because they see the value that you bring. And I think it's a little bit of your story that we had with the dynamometer. I'm not going to say you were rubbish at sales, but you were not great.
I was rubbish at sales.
And you and I had this conversation and we were like, that's okay. What else can we do? Now, at the time you chose to leave the business because I think there were limited opportunities outside sales and especially within my realm. But the truth is you find your way back into that environment through your own energy, your own skill, your own adaptability, and that's key here. So my advice is always keep learning, and I'll be the first one to say it. I studied 4 years. I hated school. I probably have never wanted to read another book in my life. All those self-help books, not my cup of tea. But it doesn't mean you're not learning. I do listen, I do engage, I have conversations, I try to see other people's opinions. And through that, I form my own. But I'm also probably a lot more relaxed about my own opinions now than I was 20 years ago.
I think your story is quite interesting because, yes, you've done so many things, you have so many skills, but these were not skills you had to go into the four walls of a university or institution for per se. These were things you picked up on the job, and it quite stands out for me because looking at your journey from Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, I was started up and leaving the country as a 14-year-old and going on to achieve all of these things. Adaptability, like you said, is one of those key levers that you leveraged. You also mentioned being self-aware, right? So how exactly would you say that adaptabilities have sort of helped you, morph into being a regional director, looking at that boy, 14-year-old, what were those things that you were intentional about, to get you to where you are now?
I think initially it wasn't necessarily a choice. When I was 14, I was told we're moving to Holland. And I have a daughter, 11 years old, and I'm, as a parent, very fearful to really upset her world. Ironically, that's what made me adaptable. Massive, massive shifts in my life. Country, culture, language. I only did that 3 times. Ironically, when I moved back to South Africa after studying and I started working there, I had made my peace. I was, I've had to restart twice in life. Once parents' choice, second time own choice. And I said, I think I've adapted enough. I will stick to, in this case, South Africa. And so, as you probably know, a country also that's got its own challenges, but it's got a lot to offer. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, again, to make a difference. But I think the adaptability comes, you become more aware in later years. But I think 20 to 30, you're bulletproof, you think you know everything. 30 to 40 years old, you're like, ooh, okay. Everything I thought I knew might not be so clear cut. There's a bit of gray in between. And I think post 40, you get into that stage of your life, you're like, well, I actually don't know anything. And the more I observe and I absorb, the probably better rounded I become. So you become a lot less opinionated when you grow older. And I think there's a shift at some point where you actually get stuck into your opinions in later years, 60, 70, 80, but that's a different conversation. So adaptability, and when you look at my journey with not only a Dynamo, it was growth. It was, first I took on South Africa, then I took on Africa, and I was exposed to Kenya, I was exposed to Nigeria, very different cultural environments, all very rich in their own accord, but you couldn't apply the one set of rules here and think that it was going to work there and then bring your South African mentality in the mix. No. You've got to spend more time observing and adapting than just coming in. I mean, I'm Dutch, I'm very direct, I still am. I try to get to a point quite quickly. But even coming to Nigeria, I see there's this whole negotiation process happening. Are you well? Is the family blessed? Cool. What are we here to discuss? Okay, this is what you want. This is what I want. And then there's a lot of, again, dancing around, and eventually come to a potential conclusion and then maybe a deal in this case.
Which is going to lead me into my next question, where I was going to ask you, what role do you think that cultural nuances, especially in the continent of Africa, play, when it comes to, closing out the deal, or even marketing as a whole, what role does culture play in all of those?
I think it's pivotal. It's always been part of my arsenal of statements or arguments or whatever you want to call it, where local relevance is pivotal to the functioning of an operation in a specific territory. And at Eskimi, it's part of our DNA. It's one of our core pillars, our people. Like when we look at the big tech giants, good luck getting service, number one, from them. And number two, good luck getting any local relevant content or guidance. It's sad but true that they probably still see Africa as one country. And I say this very purposefully, that there's many people out there that still think that Africa is a country. No clue that even within Nigeria, you've got so many different layers of individualism, cultures, different languages. I mean, that's just Nigeria alone. Côte d'Ivoire was the same. I'm sure Kenya, Tanzania all fall into that category. So we've always been proud as Eskimi to be locally relevant, having local teams on the ground. some of the more interesting, more challenging aspects of local is which I've observed over the years, is that not everybody operates on the same, I guess, levels of values. And I've seen it in the media industry, I've seen it in marketing, and one of my core values, and that's something I will never compromise on, is integrity. There's integrity and always wanting to raise a standard I mentioned earlier. But it's like, I want to protect who I am as a person. And I will not do something that steps outside those boundaries of what I have defined as, call it right or wrong. I absolutely acknowledge there's a lot of gray in between, but the truth is integrity is pivotal to move forward in life. Why? Because I think the moment you start, what's the word? This is where the French, Dutch, English gets mixed up, but compromising your values and your integrity, it's okay to observe. It's okay to look at someone else's standpoint so that you've got a better view of the landscape. But ultimately, right and wrong are pretty well defined. Like I'm going to use a simple example: murder. Murder is murder. And then even within that, there's moments where you think, okay, is it justified or not? But these are values of life that are pivotal to your own success. You need to stick to them. You need to know what's right from what's wrong. And I've found that in many countries, and South Africa included, sadly, our industry in some cases plagued by lack of integrity, where we call it brown enveloping in South Africa. And ultimately, in this case, the industries are doing themselves a disfavor. Yes, it's probably harder to have the integrity, to make the right choice, because in that moment, the easier choice is attractive. But that's what values are for. If we always choose the path of least resistance, where are we going? Sometimes there's hard decisions to be made, and that speaks to what we were saying earlier around, if you don't like the job, take some self-awareness and say, okay, I need to shift here. I can't go around blaming the world for what's happening in my life. Take accountability. And the same comes with integrity, like we have seen, I've been exposed to multinationals, big brands, and we're not here to debate their core ethics and values by any means. But I've seen budgets and especially decision-making shifting away from certain territories because those territories were being recognized as having less integrity than others. And that's a massive challenge, because what's going to happen is the control is going to shrink, the budgets are going to shrink, and the entire system is going to come under pressure because there's less available. And everybody is wanting a piece of this. Grab. There comes a point where there's no more.
True.
And the control gets ripped out.
True.
And I've seen brands do it.
Yeah.
And that's a massive challenge.
I think you're very correct. When you say that, I've seen some brands, even living, the continents, living the country due to many reasons. What you said being one of them. But what do you think could be a solution? Looking at the landscape to ensure that issues like this, do not remain or persist. I know it's a people thing. But what do you recommend, looking at your own year of experience, how you think this can sort of be mitigated, because of those young professionals coming after now?
Well, the truth is there's no simple answer to this. I think, there's not going to be a swooping change in the landscape, and the change starts with the self. You control your own decisions. And I know in Nigeria, you are exposed to a lot of challenges that are hard to live with. Life is not necessarily easy, but again, nothing is easy in life. If you take accountability for yourself, and every person out there starts changing, even if it's a change by 25%, it's still 25% better than it was before. And that's where it starts. And especially the young professionals, you might be tempted down roads that will challenge your own values and integrities. Go back to the core, go back to what matters, and potentially take the hard road. Again, and I come from a place where I've been very fortunate. Again, I spoke to privilege earlier. I had parents that could afford my dreams to let me go chase my dreams. But I think, yes, it starts with the self. There's not going to be a magic formula that will fix everything. It's about just not compromising, about saying, I will not stand for that. And that is my view on the world. Even for myself, being a regional sales director, we deal with clients a lot. I've got my set of values, for example, as to what would be acceptable when it comes to maybe taking a client out for dinner or a lunch. The moment I step out of my boundary, I will go to probably my CEO and say, you know what, I was thinking about doing this, which is a little bit outside my norm. Are you okay with it? I escalate it so that I get comfort from somebody else that is still within reason. And there can be a discussion around, is this okay or is this not? And this is especially in those moments where there's a bit of self-doubt. You either get an affirmation that it might be too far, so you step back, or it's okay, and then you go ahead. So it's not being afraid of asking for that guidance as well from leaders around you, etc., etc. And that's the piece of advice I give is to say, have your values. If in doubt, ask the question. You will never be in trouble if you have actually asked a question and somebody gave you a green light or a red light. Much better than having to deal with the consequent post-event.
Makes sense. True. Makes sense. I love that. So if you're going to think about it in retrospect now, looking at all the fantastic stuff you've done, what would you say is your proudest, moments, as a person? It could be personal, it could be career-wise, but something that, going back to your ethics, your values, that you're strongly, and you're strongly grateful for.
And it's very interesting. About 4 years ago, I went through a stage where I was in a tough personal space for a multitude of reasons. And I remember this conversation with an ex-colleague of mine. I said, what are we here for? Maybe midlife crisis. I am 49 after all, so 4 years ago would have been 45. It's about midlife. And he said something that stuck. He says, you contribute to other people's lives.
Mm.
And ironically, we spoke about it. It didn't quite resonate, but yes, I did feel that the people that I worked with, some would say worked for me, had an appreciation for the way I did things. And it's become even more abundant now, having left at Dynamo after 7 years and coming in with Eskimi, because keeping in mind, I ran Eskimi in South Africa again for a year and a bit, just South Africa, and then I took on Africa again. And not to blow my own trumpet, but I took a lot of satisfaction and pride when somebody said to me, I actually heard a lot about you and I want to come and work with you. That for me, I was like, okay, I have shifted people's mindsets. I still say it, hopefully contributed positively in people's lives. And I guess as a leader, what would one what would one want more, I guess, than shifting potentially the young professionals that are coming into the Nigerian market, shifting perception, making them aware of the potential challenges that come with entering the workplace. Because we learn also the hard way. Everybody learns the hard way. Now, after 20 years, you're a completely different person than you were 20 years ago. Very different energy levels as well. I need 8 hours of sleep every night, where as a youngster I probably needed 5. But yeah, these are important things for me. Very proud that I've got people that say, I want to work for you or with you. Let me reframe that. Because they've heard so many good things. That's was never a personal goal, but it brings a lot of pride and satisfaction after many years in the industry, and I hope to continue doing that.
Before I let you go, I just want to ask you this final question to say, what's your vision for Africa? Deep?
It's a deep question. I think, you know what, again, I've been in this world for long enough to realize that it's never going to be the vision that first world countries have. There's an element of reality that one needs to know and understand before you can make a statement of what the vision is. But my encouragement more than vision is stick to the values, stick to the values, stick to the integrity, remain adaptable, keep learning, never be too proud, never let ego take over, always acknowledge that you might not necessarily always be right, and there's never a right or wrong anyway. It's about a position on either side of a spectrum, and somewhere in the middle is the truth or the reality. So everybody lives in a different world, and it's about taking a step back and being aware of the self, always trying to improve, always trying to shift the standard slightly higher, and then things will fall into place. But accept a mediocrity is going to be the demise of everything, everyone, every organization, every country, every continent. That's why I think our jobs are to raise the standard, slowly but surely, and not compromise values.
Final question. I love the fact that you said not compromise values, right? For young people out there, who are not so clear on what these values are, who are just literally starting out life, they don't really, they just care about getting, the food on their table, just care about getting a job, how would you recommend that, they maybe find themselves or even just help themselves set those values and abide by them as they grow?
I think this is when you probably need to lean on your community, your religion in some cases, your school, your friends, your family. And I absolutely hear you. In some cases, it's a very fine line between subsistence and opportunity and growth. When you're trying to put food on the table, you might be more easily inclined to compromise certain values, and there's very little I can say against that. It's because it's hard. Life is hard, but it is about leaning on the community and standing by what you believe, and not hoping, because that's not a strategy, but knowing that things should fall in place. And I mean, my biggest learning, and I spent that first year in London at early days of my career. That first year alone gave me enough confidence to know that I could probably always go to a new place and make it. Why? Because I'd learned adaptability, and I could, like a chameleon, adapt and fit in and show my worth. Because it's about worth. It's about what can I bring to the table. And for me, there was a massive confidence boost to be able to be on my own 2 feet. Yes, I still had the home infrastructure. So again, lucky, that it was almost a personal goal of mine to no longer require that support. If in doubt, I think lean on your friends, your family, your community, your church, your religion. Those are all places where one can find guidance and peace, I guess.
Beautiful. I want to say a very big thank you to you, Connie, for making it here. Thank you so much for the insights, the gems around being adaptable. Your story is quite interesting, looking at how, you're able to find your way, and defining what it is that you don't want, and finding yourself where you really want to be, and the kind of impacts you're making, holding up and upholding those values, that you strongly believe in. And I'm sure that our viewers and audience out there must have learned so much from you. If you're out there and this message, resonates with you, feel free to share with your friends, your family, your colleagues. Try to uphold those values. Define what matters to you. Define the values that matter to you. Uphold those values. Think about the bigger picture, of what you're looking to get to in life, and you'll definitely get there. Do not be discouraged. Do not be dismayed. Life is a journey. You start from somewhere, and you eventually get to the end, which you can't really define right now. All you need to do, like Connie has said, is set those values for yourself. Integrity is critical. Being adaptable is critical. I want to say a very big thank you for tuning in, and please do enjoy the rest of your